Welcome to the Tech Talk from Nastel Technologies, entitled What's New in WebSphere MQ 7.1 and 7.5. Today's Tech Talk is presented by Richard Nicola. He's the VP of Engineering at Nastel Technologies. After his presentation will be an interactive Q&A session, and all of this will be recorded and made available on demand from our website by tomorrow. Richard, take it from here.
Thank you, Charlie. As Charlie said, my name is Richard Nicola, and we're here today as part of the Tech Talk series to talk about WebSphere MQ 7.1 and the recently announced 7.5, the main features and how they benefit you. So to start with, I'd like to take a brief look back at the history of WebSphere MQ. And as you can see at the chart at the bottom, it dates back to the early 90s. You can see the releases 1, 2, 5, 5.3, 6.0, 7, 7.1, and as I said, the recently announced 7.5 releases every few years throughout its lifetime. It is the most popular system for messaging across multiple platforms, and roughly 95% of all Fortune 1000 companies use WebSphere MQ. And Nastel has supported all of the releases of WebSphere MQ, or MQ series as it was originally known, from the beginning. So if we look at the themes of MQ 7.1, you know, IBM typically has several themes within the release. This one was focused on a couple areas: simplification, making it easier to install and use; security, you know, tightening down the security even further; a number of initiatives around cloud at IBM, and MQ was included in that; and then performance and scalability, which is always included in every release. So if we look at the key features that we're going to talk about today, these are the ones that I would consider the highlights of 7.1. There are more, but these are the ones that we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about telemetry, then the multiple version installation, channel access control and some of the things that you can do there, and then the security enhancements beyond there. So telemetry support is where we're going to start with this discussion. So telemetry, the first question I had when I heard about telemetry is, well, what is it, right? Well, telemetry, because, you know, when I think of telemetry, I somehow think of rockets and spaceships and things of that nature. But telemetry is really a technology that has to do with, as the Greek origin says, remote measurement. And what that really means is basically the communication of, in this case, measurements across a remote transmission line. Okay, so that's the origin of the word telemetry. So if we bring that into MQ and look at MQ telemetry support, how does that apply? Well, message queue telemetry transport, or MQTT, is an open message protocol that was put together that basically enables the transfer of telemetry style data, messages, from pervasive devices, basically over networks, right? So, you know, the key point of the MQTT is really messaging over a network. Of course, that is why MQ series, it ties in. And basically pervasive devices, that just means sensors, actuators, mobile phones, anything that could, you know, vehicles, you know, anything that can send information, needs information, represented by telemetry. So some examples that IBM offers, you know, the first one is, you know, you have your home, where your home has maybe a smart sensor, and it, you know, provides information to the electric company, which then determines how much electricity is being consumed, and then, you know, provides that electricity back. The other examples are, you know, healthcare, where, you know, you have some sort of biometric devices or something that's passing information to the hospital, which then analyzes that and pushes it back to you. And then a little bit different example is, maybe your credit card is used on a website, and at some point you get a message on your phone saying that your credit card has been used. So it doesn't have to be simply a device where the information is pushed from the device. It could also be information that is pushed to it. So just to kind of summarize that, what is the purpose? Well, it allows smart devices and applications to publish and subscribe messages using MQ as an underlying transport. Thus, you get the reliable messaging that MQ provides. And as I said, that could be mobile devices. It could be sensors. It could be RFID tags, smart meters, rocket ships, and so on. So that's the first feature, is the MQ telemetry support bundled into MQ 7.1. So the next main feature that we're going to look at today is the multiple version support. Now, in the next Tech Talk, we're actually going to go through this in quite a bit more detail. Talk about how you actually set it up and implement it, how you use it, some of the gotchas to watch out for, and so on. But today we're just going to talk about the highlights. So at the high level, what is it? Well, it's coexistence of multiple versions of MQ running on the same server at the same time. So this was introduced to allow you to, for example, to migrate from one version to MQ on a system without having to put a completely different host server up, moving everything over to it, for example, or of course upgrading right in place, which of course some customers were reluctant to upgrade all of their queue managers on a server at the same time. So it basically allows you to have multiple instances, and as I've shown here in my picture, that could be version 7.0, 7.1, and then of course fix packs, later fix packs to 7.1 as well, and of course with 7.5 coming out, then those would apply as well. And then the applications, of course, can connect up to the queue managers that that they need to connect up to, and they're really unaware of the fact that there's multiple different installations in place. Well, almost unaware, and we'll talk more about that in the next session. So, what does it mean? Well, it means you can run 7.0.1.7, which is the compatibility version, and one or more 7.1 installations on the same system. Now, they basically are, as I use the term installation, they're called installations. You can have separate installations, and they each have their own executables. The data folders can actually be shared. So there could be different queue managers, with different versions writing into the same folders, which is fine because the queue manager data is separate. You have a common MQSINI file, which is basically the directory of the queue manager environment. And then basically the application and the profiles that they use determine which queue managers that they're going to connect to and use. Okay? One of the benefits of this, of course, is that the installation location is no longer fixed. You can now put it, wherever you'd like. As I say, we'll talk more about that in the follow-on session. The next one I wanted to look at specifically was the channel access control, because this is an area that's been a little bit of a concern for some customers, because the way that the channels worked is that there was some, I don't want to say security holes in the environment, but it wasn't as secure perhaps as customers would like for certain configurations and setups. So what the channel access control provides is the ability to both block and restrict access by IP address and or users. So what that means is that now you can actually have a queue manager where the channel will only accept connections from a specific IP address, which means that that channel is fairly secure from any sort of compromising by external users. So nobody else other than the IP address that has been identified can connect. You can also set the MCA user, which is, if you're not familiar with that, basically it allows the message channel agent, it associates a user with it. It's often used by client applications to allow the clients to have access to the resources that they want without having to actually have the user that's running the client log in with an MQ defined user. And that's always been one of the areas that's been a bit of a security concern for some customers, because of course anybody who connects to that server connection basically gets that user assigned to them. With this now, you can actually set different MCA users based on different IP addresses. You can basically set it up again based on user, by the SSL connection that's being used, by the queue manager that's making the channel connection in the case of a queue manager versus a client connection. All of those things can be done now within the client definition. You can also choose whether or not SSL is required in order to connect, and then again that could be by IP address as well. So certain IP addresses could require SSL connections, whereas other IP addresses could in fact get their MCA user set and not require an SSL connection. Now, of course, one of the things here is that this is not a firewall replacement. It's not designed to be the end-all to any security means, but it definitely is a major improvement from the existing connections environment. Okay, so one of the things about MQ is, of course, we're passing messages around the system. So customers are of course concerned about security of their environment, and how that how the messages are being secured, how the connections are established, and so on. So there were a number of enhancements in 7.1 specifically entered at this area. The first was the ability to set security for objects that do not exist yet. That is, objects that are yet to be defined. In the previous releases, the object had to exist before it could be secured. They also have support now for remote object authorization, which means you can define an object that's on a foreign system and the security related to it, rather than relying on the transmit queue security, which was a little bit more challenging to set up. There are a number of compliance and cryptography changes. So there's the FIPS 140-2 across the platforms. There's elliptical curve cryptography and SSA2, as well as NSA Suite B compliance. Again, just making sure that MQ does in fact conform with all of the security initiatives. And then they've added for channel status and exits some of the SSL information, the SSL peer, the certificate, as well as the serial number, so that can be used to validate, say, within a channel exit, information about the peer that's connecting. Okay, things of that nature. Okay, so looking briefly at WebSphere MQ 7.5, which I said is basically just recently been announced on April 24th, scheduled for availability, electronic availability as of June 15th. So that has just happened, and then media available after July 6th. And as we'll see in the follow-on features, you'll see what it specifically offered. One of the key things down here at the bottom is that WebSphere for MQ ZOS was not updated as a part of MQ 7.5. And these are the key things that have been announced up until this point. First off is that there is a common install for the MQ server, as well as for telemetry, the file transfer edition, and the advanced message security. Those are now embedded into the install. as well as the extended transactional client. Those have all been bundled together so you get a common install. So one of the key things, of course, in this version is the fact that you have a common install. And in fact, the only real highlight is the fact that multiple transmission queues can now be set up in a clustered queue environment. Basically, that was done to allow you to have more throughput, say, in a certain cluster than others, rather than having all of the traffic trying to contend for the same cluster transmission queues. That's now been separated out so you can have multiple transmission queues. Of course, the other thing I guess I should mention, you'll notice, is that several of the features that they've bundled still are additional cost items. You still have to pay licensing fees for those. They've just made it easier to install. So at this point, I will open it up to questions. Anything you have regarding the MQ 7.1 or 7.5 releases.
Thank you, Richard. That was very informative. We're going to go to a Q&A session after this in a moment. But before we do, I wanted to remind you that this is a Tech Talk in a series of Tech Talks. The next one scheduled is on July 18th, featuring our CTO, Albert Mavashev, and the topic will be detecting trends in application performance monitoring. So let's go to the Q&A. Does anyone have a question out there? Hi, Richard. Here's our first question, and it is this. Isn't there a new queue manager backup command in 7.1? But for some reason, you didn't mention it.
Yes, this is one of the features in 7.1. There are many features that I haven't covered today. In this specific case, since Autopilot for WebSphere MQ had a support for a queue manager backup for a long time, I just didn't mention it.
Any other questions out there? Okay, I see one. Can I install WebSphere MQ 7.1 on a system with 7.0.1.4, or can I use a 7.0 client to connect to 7.1? Richard, what say you?
Let's see. I assume you mean either a dual or a coexistent install of 7.0.1.4 and 7.1. So the quick answer to that is no. The minimum fix pack is 7.0.1.7, and WMQ 7.1 actually checks during the install, and it won't allow you to continue if you don't have the prereq. Now, regarding the client, yes, you can connect to 7.1 or 7.5 from an older client, and in fact, the client interfaces are generally backward compatible for several releases because people run older versions of MQ for various reasons.
Well, looks like we got a few questions here. All right, the next one for you, Richard. Since I guess they means IBM, normally release every 2 years, why did IBM deliver 7.5 so soon after 7.1?
Well, I've given up trying to understand IBM. However, as you saw, 7.5 is primarily a packaging release. So I suspect once they figured out that it worked for the telemetry, they figured they should, expand the concept. The remainder of the changes are in 7.5 are certainly less significant.
All right. Well, here's a mystery for you, Richard. Whatever happened to WMQ version 8?
Again, I can't talk to the specifics of this, but IBM does have specific rules for major and minor releases. So basically 7.1, 7.5 was the release that was originally discussed as being version 8. This would imply that the scope of the release was not seen as significant enough for a major version change.
So our next question, why do we need multiple transmission queues in the cluster queue management? Richard?
Okay, so The reason they did this is when you have a number of different clusters that are interacting. It was done primarily to increase the capacity, say that you had one queue manager that was sending a lot more traffic than another. So it's an option. You don't have to do this. It's not required, but it is an option to increase the throughput.
All right. With the multi-version installation, can the same queue manager use different versions instead of having 2, 3, or more queue managers pointing to the different versions?
So no, you can't have the same queue manager using different versions. It's going to be each queue manager is associated with a specific version. But what you can have that you didn't before is the ability to actually have different queue managers at different versions on the same server.
On the slide for MQ 7.5, what was the screenshot you showed?
Let me see. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is an example of message tracking. Nastel can follow a message from its arrival through MQ queues, queue managers, across channels, we can track the reply message back to the sending application and so on. So this was just an example of associating a message flow. We can also do that with other middleware layers such as application servers to provide the path of the transactions. And this is just one of the extended capabilities that Nastel has added to WebSphere MQ that meets the demands of our middleware customers. This is used in a number of ways, such as to track messages during development and in production, to be able to provide an audit trail, or to diagnose cases where the application's messages are not flowing properly, either because of an application or a configuration issue, or so on. It was just included to show that feature. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Wait. I see one more question we'll do before we finish up. So the question is: I thought that the extended transactional client was free as of the announcement of 7.5. So the answer is yes, that is correct. Now on the slide I showed it with a $sign, which I guess was a bit misleading. It is still licensed software, so in order to use it you have to be running MQ. That is a requirement of the client, but it is licensed now for any usage of MQ. Okay, one other thing I did want to mention before we finish today is I did include a number of screenshots on the slides as well of our Autopilot on Demand for WebSphere MQ product. And this product allows you to basically see your queue managers, the queues, the channels, the messages, take actions against them, create them, and so on. And this is part of a download that we offer. And so I wanted to show you how to get that. You can go to our website, and from our website, if you select the Autopilot on Demand for WebSphere MQ link, it'll provide two things. One, it'll provide an option where you can get a short presentation about how the tool works, as well as a download link where you can download a free version of the tool. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is that there is in fact a new version that is just coming out. However, I'd encourage you to go ahead and register now, because if you register for the download today, as soon as the new version is available, we'll make it available to you.
I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's Tech Talk. If you have any questions about the content today, please feel free to contact us in any of the ways you see on the screen. Or if you have ideas or suggestions for future Tech Talks, please send those in as well. Thank you much. Have a great day.